Hello everybody, welcome to the Java course. If we want to set up a group of variables, we don't need to set them up individually. Instead, we can set them up with the use of arrays. So when we have arrays, we can group some related variables together. And let's see how we can set up an array. Okay, when we set up an array, we don't set up the arrays immediately. Instead, we set up a reference variable to the array object that we will create later. And the arrays will store integer primitives. So I would use int followed by a pair of square brackets to indicate that the array referenced by this reference variable will be storing integer primitives for all of the elements inside that array. So for now, the object is not yet constructed. We simply create a reference variable. And how can we create that object? Now we create the object with the new keyword. So that means I'm going to set up an array that stores integer primitives, and the number of elements for that array is 5. So the object is now constructed, and its reference variable is stored in this name called int array1. For arrays, we have to remember something during our construction. When we set up an array, the element stored in the array will all be zeros essentially. If it is an array of string references, all the strings will be pointing to null. And if it is an array of storing Boolean primitives, all the Boolean primitives will be storing false as the initial value. Okay, that's an important property of array initialization. We can look at the table on the screen to get some idea of the initialization performed by Java when we create a new array. So how can we print out the content stored in the array? Suppose I do something like this. Let us see the result. I just want to print out the content in the reference variable. Let me save it and run it. Yes, when I simply print out the reference variable, I will get something like this. I means the type of the primitives stored in the arrays, and this is the hash code for helping the computer find out the array in the computer system, I mean in the memory system. So this is simply a reference content stored in the reference variable. We don't print out the content stored in the arrays yet. So how can we do that? We can try one example. Okay, the index followed by the reference variable is going to show me the particular element stored in the array. And we have to notice that the index starts with 0. So essentially, the first element would correspond to index 0, and the second element would correspond to element 1, index 1, and so on. So let me print a value stored in the int array 1 out. Yes, I will get 0 being the value stored in the first element of the array referenced by int array 1. Okay, so that is the initialization result performed by Java automatically when we set up a new array in this format. We can try one more example of setting up an array of storing Boolean values. When we set up an array of Boolean values, all the Boolean values stored in the elements will be set as false at the beginning. Okay, here I have just combined the two lines of array assignment into just one line. So for this line, I'm going to set up 4 elements for my array that stores Boolean values. And the reference variable corresponding to this array of Boolean values is called isAdult. So I'm going to store the condition of some students coming from my school, for example. So I would like to check whether each student is already an adult or not. Let me print it out. Yes, I will get false for the third element of the array referenced by isAdult. So the third element in the array is having index 2 instead of index 3. So we have to remember the property of indexing in Java arrays. We don't always use the new keyword to initialize our arrays. Instead, we can define an array like what we did with a string literal. So how can we do that? Okay, I'm going to set up an array that is having these 4 integer primitives in the array, and the reference variable to this array is called int array2. So I can simply do what we did similarly for assigning a string content with a string literal. And we have to notice something. When we initialize the array with particular content in just one line, we have to notice that no separation is allowed. That means we can't initialize the reference with 2 lines that we did on line number 5 and line number 6. So that means we cannot set up the reference variable first and then we assign the reference variable with the content and that we want to store in the array. We have to do so in just one line only. Okay, so that's the rule for this kind of assignment. if I want to print out the third element of the array object referenced by int array2, I can do something like this. As usual, save it, run it. Well, let me check. In array2, okay. So I will get 4 as the answer. That means I can print out the third element corresponding to the array referenced by int array2. So that is the third element. So that means we can use the new keyword or the literal assignment to create arrays. Let us see something special. Just like other object types, reference variables of arrays can be treated quite similarly. When we set up this kind of reference variable assignment, I just want to have a new name called int array3 that is pointing to the same array as pointed by the reference variable called int array2. So that means I don't create a new object. I simply create one more reference variable to the original array. So in this case, can we equate the two reference variables? Yes, we can. So here I'm going to equate the two reference variables. What will I get? Yes, I will get true because the two reference variables are storing the same reference to a certain array. Which array? The array that stores 2, 5, 4, and 3. So again, I can print out the elements of that array by using the new reference variable. Let me check. OUT. Okay, I will still get 4 because int array3 is simply pointing to the original array. So the third element of that array is 4. So I will get the same answer as my previous printing result. The next topic about arrays is the array length. An array length is the number of elements that can be stored in the array. So how can we find the array length out? I can show you with an example. Here I use the property called length pertaining to an array reference. So when I use this format, reference dot length, I will be able to find out the length of the array referenced by this variable. So the whole statement is like that. I'm going to set up a new array whose reference is now called int array4, and this array is storing integer primitives. Okay, and how large is this array? The amount of elements for this new array is the same as the number of elements of int array3. So that means for int array3 I have 4 elements. So this value would return 4, and int array4 will be pointing to an array having 4 elements. Of course, initially, all these 4 elements are set at 0. And then I'm going to do something like this. What does it mean by this for loop? Essentially, I'm going to copy the elements from int array 3 to the corresponding positions of int array 4. Okay, let me explain here. The stopping condition is that when I is larger than or equal to int array 3 dot length, we will stop the iteration. And here we know that it is equal to 4. So that means the for loop is going to copy all the elements from array 3 to array 4. And the copy is like that. We simply call the reference variable and then we put the index, and after we have got the number pertaining to that index, we put this value to the corresponding index of int array 4. And we have to notice something, because we have already used the new keyword in declaring int array 4, and in Java it is going to set up a dedicated memory to this object to this object. So this reference is pointing to a new object. And we have to notice something here. We have 2 objects which are distinct. So even though the values stored in the 2 arrays are the same, they are treated as 2 distinct objects. We have to notice this important property. How can I verify this property? I can equate the 2 reference variables. When I print it out, I would get false. Yes, the answer is false, because these 2 reference variables are actually pointing to 2 distinct objects, even though the content stored in the 2 objects are the same. As long as they have different references, the equality would return false. Okay, and we can go to another situation of determining the array size on the go. Suppose I have a variable called my length, and it is storing a value of 3, and then I can make use of this variable to initialize a new array. Okay, in this case, I'm going to set up a new array that is having 3 elements. And how can I get this number of elements? I simply obtain the number of elements by using the variable called by length. And for this array, what will I do? Okay, this for loop is going to set up the elements of the new array such that each element would correspond to the index of the elements. So I simply put 0 as the first element of this new array, 1 as the second element of this array, so on and so forth until I reach the number of elements, which is 3. So I would have the 3 elements being stored as 0, 1, and 2. If I want to traverse this array, what can I do? I can make use of the for loop to help me do so. For this for loop, I can do something like this. Okay, I'm going to print the contents in the array in just 1 line. Let me see the result. There is an error. Oh, it should be int array 5. Okay, I will get 0, 1, and 2, and each number is followed by a space, because the space comes from the content in the printing statement. Okay, so I can make use of the for loop to help me traverse every element in the particular array in this way. Okay, for now we can introduce another approach of traversing the array. We can use the for each loop. What is it like that? It is quite similar to a conventional for loop. Okay, this for each loop is like this. For int I colon int array 5, and then we do the things as usual. This for loop means that I'm going to pick up each of the elements of an array referenced by int array 5. So we will go through all the elements from the beginning to the end of the array. So let me see the result. Yes, I will get 0, 1, and 2 as the answer coming from the printing statement. Okay, so we have 2 ways. One is by using the for loop, and the other way is by using the for each loop. So the colon means for each. Okay, we have one thing to be careful when we initialize arrays by using the literal format. When we do string literal assignments, the 2 assignments would point to the same string object if the string objects are both the same, just like this. if we have two such assignments, both reference variables of the string would point to the same object in the memory space. But it is not the case for array assignment by using the literal form. Now I have a new array reference that points to an array of integers. Okay, so for this situation, we have a new array in the memory space. But how about this one? When we have another reference variable that is defined by using the literal format, we will create another object in the memory space. So what does it mean by that? We can check it out by printing the equality condition. Let me save it and run it. Yes, I will get false. So when we use the literal format of array assignment, we will create two distinct objects. It is not similar to the case when we create strings by using string literals. If we have two such strings defined in this way, we will have true being the equality value coming from the comparison here. But for arrays, we have to be careful. This kind of equality does not hold. So we have to remember something here. Okay, since we have two distinct arrays, the references of these two arrays are not the same. And that's why we would get false in this situation. Excuse me. If we really want to compare the contents of two arrays, how can I do that? We know that we can't simply equate the two reference variables. Is there any mechanism of comparing the contents? Yes, we have such a mechanism provided by Java. Before doing so, we have to go to the very beginning, and I have to import one tool. We have to import the arrays library first. And after this import, I can do something like this. Okay, I used the arrays.equals method. And then I put two references as the actual parameters of this equals method. What will I get? Let me save it and run it. I will get true. So this equals method is going to compare the elements one by one. So we can make sure that we would get the same number of elements if this equality holds according to the arrays.equals method. And this comparison by means of the equals method is applicable to arrays of other primitive data types too. So this is one way of comparing the contents of the two arrays instead of using the equality signs, which might not give you the correct answer. Here I want to discuss one more important topic, which is called the array of object references. What does it mean by that? I want to set up something like this. What is a student? A student is like this. A student is simply a class. For this class, I would have a private instance variable to store the name of the student, and one more integer primitive to store the year of study. So I have two instance variables. Also, I set up the constructor for this student class, and for this student class, I have a method called getName, which returns the name, and a getYear of study method, which returns the year of study for that particular student. So this is a pretty simple class. I want to create an array of student objects reference, and of course we want to store the references of these student objects in the array referenced by student array. Okay, so I would have this format: student square brackets student array equals new student 3. So I would have 3 elements for this student array object, and each student array object is storing the reference to a student object. We don't store the objects directly into an array. Instead, we store the references of the objects. This is an important property in Java. Now I haven't initialized anything for the student array. So what will I get when I print out the first element of this student array? Yes, I will get null, because the student array is not being set to point to other references. So initially, all the content stored in the student array would be null, okay? And now I set up the contents for my student array. Okay, when I set up a new student object, I have to use the new keyword, and I would have this element being pointed to this new student object, whose name is Gary and whose year of study is 9. So I can do similar things for the other 2 elements of this student array. Okay, I created 3 student objects, and each reference of the objects is stored in the corresponding elements of the student array. Okay. So if I want to get the name of a student from a certain student array element, I can do something like this. Okay, what I'm going to do is that I want to print out the name of the student stored in the element with index 0. More precisely, I would like to get the name of the student referred to by the element from student array 0. Okay, so what will I get? Yes, I will get Gary as the answer, because it is simply the first student name stored in the student array. Okay, so that's the important property of setting up some object references to the arrays. We have to make use of the new keywords, especially when we want to create some user-defined objects in such a way like the student.java class. So this is the end of the video that discusses the principles of arrays. This is the end of the video. If you have any questions about my video, feel free to leave your comments on the comment section below the video. If you like this video, please give me a like and please subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching.